the students' demand has become more stronger each day. Last week, this week, we've seen protests all over the nation. Wits particularly, it started here. What is your response to the call for free education as a Vice Chancellor?
So I've said on many occasions that if you ask Adam Habib's view is that free education is a legitimate call and that this country can only benefit from having a free education. But I don't think that it's going to happen overnight. No fundamental social reform happens overnight. That what you have effectively is free education. If you're going to suddenly effect it per annum, it would cost, full cost, about 50 billion rand in addition to what is currently invested. And I don't think that that's just going to happen overnight. So the question becomes, how do we structure a program that works towards the goal of free education? The second thing that I've been quite frank about is I don't think that you can say it's legitimate to suspend the academic program this year and to sacrifice the academic program of 1 million students in higher education because you want the ultimate goal of free education. You know, there are many, in the 1980s, there was a very dangerous call made by some people. It said, no education before liberation. And it destroyed a generation. The question that we have to ask now is there's a call being made by some people that says if there's no free education, there should be no education at all. I think it's an irresponsible call. It could destroy a generation. And I think that we cannot allow that to happen. And so what we need to do is to try and get, if you like, a level of pragmatism so that we begin to build towards an agenda for free education, but for now that we don't sacrifice the education of 1 million students.
But do you believe this is a legitimate call, or are there some individuals trying to seek their own agendas here?
I think there's always individuals trying to seek their own agendas. But I think that the demand for free education is a legitimate one. To be fair, the students have said that the political parties, including the ruling party, have been promising this for years. They walked around and said, we're going to free access to higher education. And in the last 15 years, actually reduced the subsidy every single year. And so they said one thing and did the exact opposite. And this has created the crisis that we have. But what people have to understand is free education cannot be delivered by vice chancellors, cannot be delivered by anybody. And that vice chancellors cannot take the responsibility of creating an unsafe campus. In many places, then they would be violating their responsibility. In many places in this country, campuses are burning, literally. We've got residents burning. Only this morning, there are places burning. So when people say to me, there's no threat, I say, what are you seeing around the country? What do you mean there's no threat? What do you think is happening when burnings are happening all over the place? So don't tell me there's no threat. My responsibility is to try and make sure that nobody gets hurt. And actually, it's everybody's responsibility, including leaders. You should not be playing and being adventurous with the lives of students or anybody else. This is not an acceptable behavior. And we all need to behave with the kind of measuredness that is required to ensure that as a society we can both address the goal of free education, but not sacrifice the lives of millions of students.
But as a Vice Chancellor, what's your comment on Minister Nzimande now placing the buck to the university, saying it's up to the university to decide on your own academic fees, but he's, however, put the cap at 8%?
So let me just say, firstly, at one level, that's what he's speaking is the legal condition. The minister has no authority to effectively raise fees at universities. The authority for setting fees is the councils of the universities. That is what the legislation says. That is what the Higher Education Act says. The minister has no authority. All the minister can do is make a recommendation. It's not even a cap. He can make a recommendation and say, this is what I think you should do. And that's what he has done. He has effectively made a recommendation to all of the universities. Now the universities that will have to consider that, and I think they will have to make a decision in that regard. None of them have disagreed with the minister. None of them said we won't do that. And my council will sit at the end of this week and deliberate on that question. But what we cannot have is anybody making a decision in violation of the legal rules of our society. The legal rules are there for a particular reason. And so he's made a recommendation. I think it would be a very persuasive recommendation. It is something that our councils will take seriously. But ultimately, they will have to make the decisions.
And also, Professor, can you talk about the violence? You've already answered part of my question, but regarding the violence that's been going on, especially at Wits University last week, there was a chaos, security guys and students at war pelting stones, the police and the students, and there have been various instances, in fact, the university sending out statements saying, there was a lack of communication with the security, they haven't been given full equipped securities who knows how to defend the university as well as students, but they retaliated back at the students by throwing stones. How do you react to that?
So, let me say a couple of things. Firstly, private security is here to protect students. That's why we brought them. And anybody says we don't need them should ask the question that there was an attempt to burn a bus with students on it. What do you mean you don't need it? There was an attempt to burn a library early on in the year, and it was security that prevented that. There was an attempt where people have been violent. This past week, we saw acts of violence. And the acts of violence are deplorable. I wasn't here. I saw it from afar. But it was deplorable what I saw. And the violence from all sides is deplorable. So the students picked up stones, and they threw them. They threw them at the private security. And the private security retaliated. Now that's wrong, because the purpose of security itself is to be disciplined, is to be able to respond in a peaceful way to the provocation that happened. The fact that they didn't shows that they lacked the training, and that's a problem. And we've started an investigation in this regard. But we should ask the students, why the hell are you throwing stones in the first place? Why are you provoking? Why did you go into classrooms and bash up students? Are you entitled to do this? Who gives you the authority to bash up another student who decides to study? Who gives you the authority to violate somebody else's rights? You often too quickly demand your own rights. But what about other people's rights? Why don't you take responsibility? I think that they need to be criticized for this. So the question is, how do we go forward? Was there a lapse in judgment? Absolutely, and we will investigate that. But here's the problem. At the moment, if you go to any other country in the world, I was last week in the UN, as I said. I met 10 other vice chancellors, and they are utterly astonished. It is in any normal responsibility for protecting the university, which is a public asset. Why do I have to find private security to do this? Where are the police meeting their own responsibilities in this regard? This university system is under threat. It will be destroyed if we continue like this. And frankly, it will be destroyed for generations to come. You can't destroy a university and suddenly be rebuilt again. And people who are playing, who are being adventurous with universities, with institutions meant to work for. That's the tragedy of what has happened. That actually there's a measuredness that develops. That effectively we all take a step back. That realize that this thing can't be done overnight. To look towards a significant solution to the challenges. And then effectively finding a plan towards free education. But what is not acceptable is an approach that says, if you don't do A, B, and C, I will burn the place down. That kind of behavior cannot be tolerated. Today, it's students. Tomorrow, it will be workers. Thursday, it will be communities. You know what? The society will not exist. Don't play with the lives of our people. Don't play with the lives of our students. That's just unacceptable. The final thing is, I don't think ordinary students are being heard. People say they speak for the students. I've heard people say in the evocative description, we for the black child. You know what? I want to hear the black child say what their views are. Do they want to continue studying? Because the black children and the white children and the brown children and all of the colors in between that are writing to me, they're saying, while we support free education, we do not want to sacrifice this year. That we want to be represented. We want our academic programs to continue. That's what they're saying to me. We need to hear those voices because their future is being sacrificed as a result. And so, there's this vanguard is that we know for the rest of the people. Nobody knows for the rest of the people. The people must make their voices heard. And it is the responsibility of leadership to be accountable to the very people they claim to represent. Otherwise, we just repeat the mistakes of our past.
Okay. And adding on the same thing, what happens to those students, now the same students you're talking about who's been writing in emails, calling the university on just to get a clear picture on what's going to happen to the future? And for instance, this morning we met one student trying to come into Solomon Mahlangu House where he said he was supposed to write a test. And then he says, oh, I didn't know I was not writing. So what happens to those students?
Firstly, he shouldn't not know why he's not writing. We made an announcement through the media. We've communicated to students. How can you not know? We said that the academic program is cancelled. So the student is being slightly silly when he says, I did not know. Having said that, there are many people who understudy. And we are looking at that. One of the things we are looking at is, should we have, for instance, a referendum or perhaps a poll to hear what students are saying? Should we hear what staff are saying? So that we can begin to say, this is what the university community wants. That nobody claims they represent anybody, that we actually have evidence that this is what.
Sorry, but are you planning to meet the students anytime soon?
At the moment, we've tried last week. We haven't met them. They refused. We haven't received any set of demands. There's very clear, there's a set of issues around free education that we cannot deliver. That has to be a government and system-wide situation. There are demands that students have just sent me a note saying that they want to do a march in and receive a memorandum. We have a whole set of protocols around this. The Dean of Student, you make a request to the Dean of Student, we'll take it into consideration. We will receive the memorandum through the Office of the Dean of Students. We've done this before and we will deal with it again. That's what happens. What is not acceptable is somebody say, I want to see you at this time, at this place. I've got a job to do. And it's become a very, very difficult job. And frankly, a lot of people say, you know what, Vice Chancellors get paid. It's actually one of the most miserable jobs in this country at the moment. It's not a pleasure to working as a Vice Chancellor. And if anybody thinks they should come and try and live a life in a day of a Vice Chancellor. Because actually, this is not the job that most Vice Chancellors live anywhere in the world. Most Vice Chancellors worry about research and teaching and getting the academic program together. They don't have to worry about security protocols and all of the other things that they've never been trained for. That's the tragedy. You think that Vice Chancellors have a good job or higher education. It's the most miserable job in this country at the moment. And I know that some people say, well, leave. But you know what? If this Vice Chancellor and many of the other Vice Chancellors leave, this system will collapse. Be under no illusions. This system will collapse. And frankly, generation after generation will be compromised. That's the point. You have to understand that the mandate here is to try and protect what are public institutions for generations to come. And it shouldn't be some people being adventurous around this because they do not pay the consequences. It's the generations that come that will pay the consequences for the choices that are made today.
So, Professor, what should we expect this academic year? And also, if you look at long-term 3 years plan, what can we expect?
Well, it depends what happens now. And I think that whether you're looking at these universities around the country, everybody is trying to get the academic program on track. But if we don't succeed, and if we don't bring this together, then this country's higher education system will collapse. And then any notion of inclusive education or inclusive development also collapses. And any notion of all of the futures of the Freedom Charter being fulfilled will also collapse. So that's what you're effectively saying. And the protection of this higher education system is not the job of the Vice Chancellors alone. I need to be heard. But I want to hear your parents. I want to hear all of the students. I want to hear government and I want to hear business. Because frankly, their own futures are tied to the survival of higher education system. And it's time that they were heard on the subject. Not in an adventurous way, not in a way that doesn't address the problems, to address all of those issues. But don't play with the lives of our people, because frankly, everybody will suffer as a result.
And also one thing, the commission was basically to set up by President to look at this whole feasibility of whether free education in South Africa is likely or not, whether they can really give free education to poor students. Do you think perhaps, because this has been at the center point, that even they are delaying, or the time they're taking, saying they're going to submit the preliminary report in November and the final report only next 2017. Do you think they should perhaps fast-track the process?
I would love to see some fast track of the process, frankly. I wouldn't have done it exactly the way the president decided. I think that there were other ways to have done this. Frankly, I would love to get the financing, some real economists and some real people who understand higher education and the system around the table, lock the bloody room up and let them sit for 10 days. They'll find you a answer. There are models to do this. There's lots of research done. And so there are ways to have done this in a much more cost-effective and efficient way. But frankly, that was not done. It wasn't my decision to make. And so they made the decision in particular ways. But you know what? I'd like some answers very soon. Because frankly, we cannot continue like this for too long.
Lastly, what transpired in the meeting that took place this morning?
Which meeting?
You all didn't have the council meeting, executive council meeting?
There's no council. It's just a normal executive meeting, and it's our normal operations. Okay, we have a council meeting, I think, sometime later this week.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.